let's talk about dopamine first. Before we even talk about limerence or we talk about heartbreak or why you feel like you're actually going insane over a person, I want to start the conversation with dopamine. Because if you understand how dopamine works, then a lot of the shame and self-blame around why can't I just get over this person, it goes away. Or at least it greatly diminishes so that you can go back to maybe sleeping a little bit at night. Hi, I'm Madalena and this is You Reclaimed. Around here we spend a lot of time talking about how we reclaim our lives back from the grips of childhood trauma, from emotional dysregulation and from anxiety. And we do this ongoing exercise because we want to live our lives on our own terms. I hope you stick around. Before we get into it, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any future videos. And if you're finding this content helpful, please give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. I'm going to start by telling you about an old talk I remember watching from Tim Fletcher. I think it might be one of his very first videos that he has on his channel. This was back when he was doing a lot of talks around addiction and recovery. And in this talk, he explains how dopamine and addiction are connected in a way that it just made it really make sense to me. And I think it will make sense to you as well. So I'll do my best to explain it in the way he did because it was so visual and helpful. So in this video I mentioned, Tim explains it something like this. If you want to determine a baseline of dopamine, it could look like you listening to me right now. You're just sitting there in your chair and you're listening to someone speak. You could be considered at a dopamine level of 0, and that's your baseline. You're not miserable, you're not high on anything, you're not experiencing any particular height of pleasure. You're just normal. But then let's say you go out and you eat your favorite meal, or you do something a little bit pleasurable. Now you move up to a level of about 1, just 1. It's a little bump. And your brain goes, oh, okay, that's nice, that feels nice. And it produces a little bit of dopamine. Then there are things that are more pleasurable for humans. And here Tim equates this level to things that have a sexual component. And that kind of natural, intense pleasure that many people would consider one of the most pleasurable things in life would bring you up to about a level 2. That's it. So not too much higher than that first level of 1. Still natural and still within the normal range of what the brain can handle. Then Tim Fletcher says, now compare that to a hard drug like meth or crack. Those would bring you to a level 10 or 12. Way above what your brain is designed to handle on a regular basis. So what does your brain do? Because your brain is smart and it wants to protect itself, it starts to turn things down. It goes, this here is too much. We cannot live at a level 10 or 12 of dopamine. We have to protect the body by dialing this intensity down. And that's why people who do drugs don't get the same high the second, third, fourth time around, because the brain is literally trying to save itself by turning down the level of dopamine, essentially turning off its ability to produce the same amounts of dopamine. Now, Tim Fletcher's talk wasn't about limerence or love or attachment at all. He was talking in this video about addiction and addiction recovery. What I wanted to do was borrow Tim's way of explaining dopamine because it's such a good way to understand the difference between normal levels of dopamine and heightened levels of dopamine. And to understand what's really happening in your brain when dopamine is involved. And limerence is actually a bit more complicated than just dopamine. There's a whole neurochemical soup going on in limerence. There's dopamine for motivation and reward. There's norepinephrine for that keyed up, can't sleep feeling. There's oxytocin when you actually have contact and real bonding with this person. And often lower serotonin, which is part of why you get the obsessive non-stop thoughts. So it's not that limerence equals dopamine only. It's just that dopamine is the part that keeps you going back. And I'm talking here about the kind of limerence that we mostly talk about on this channel. The one that unfortunately doesn't get to turn into a secure, settled relationship where things calm down and where serotonin and oxytocin and vasopressin take over and take the relationship further. This is the unresolved kind of limerence. So the dopamine part just keeps on running. If this is the first time you're hearing about limerence, I'll link the stages video down in the description so that you can watch that after and understand the sequence of things that usually happen in limerence. That video is called The 3 Stages of Limerence and How They Hook You. Now, why am I telling you all this about dopamine in a video about heartbreak and limerence? Well, because the same basic idea applies when you have one very specific source of reward. One person that your brain starts to light up for. I'm not saying your crush is the same as meth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's the same reward system. It's the same pathway being activated. The same, that felt good. I want more of that circuitry in action. And here's another important part of how your brain gets addicted. When your brain keeps getting big, regular hits of dopamine from one source, it doesn't just turn the volume down. It also kind of moves what it thinks is normal. In other words, your system starts to get used to operating at a different level. So now, being at this higher, more stimulated level is what begins to feel normal. That level then becomes the level that we would call 0, that your body now constantly wants to get back to. What does that mean for you and your LO? You're going to be reaching out to them a lot. Now, I'm not saying limerence is the same as meth or crack. It's not the same intensity. It's not doing the same kind of damage to your brain. But the intense euphoria that you feel at the height of limerence is definitely not at a level 1 of a good meal. It might even be higher than a level 2, because although there's usually a lot of attraction involved in limerence, it's not really about sex. It's more about love and the reciprocity of love and loving feelings. And that for a lot of us normal humans, especially when we have complex trauma, ties into deep, deep layers of unconscious, unresolved wounds. But the principle of dopamine is the same. If your brain keeps getting its feel good from one person, your brain will start treating that, interactions with that person, fantasizing about that person, ruminating over that person, obsessing over that person. It starts to treat that as the emotional level that it wants to be at, because that level becomes your normal. Which is why when you take that person away, you don't just drop to 0. You drop below 0 because your system was adjusted upward and now the supply is gone. And to make it even trickier, your dopamine system also gets sensitized to this specific person. That just means that your brain becomes extra responsive to their cues, to their name, to their face, to their body, to a message from them, to a call from them, and also to thoughts, to ruminations, etc. about the LO, and less responsive to all the normal things that used to give you pleasure. So day-to-day life feels kind of flat, but anything related to them still lights up the system. That's why it feels so compelling, almost crushingly motivating to keep trying to get their attention or affection, because your brain is basically saying, that's the one thing that still works. Go get more of that. Otherwise, we're going down. So then what happens when you meet someone, or you get into some sort of situationship, or you fall deeply in love, or you get hooked in an intense episode of limerence? Suddenly, this one person is now the thing that gives you your little dopamine spikes. You see their name come up on your phone, little spike. They watch your story, or you see their story, another little spike. They text you back a little faster today than normal, bigger spike. That's direct attention. They flirt, they come back after disappearing for a few days, they tell you they miss you, they tell you they love you, big spike. And if you're limerent, even thinking about them or fantasizing about them without any actual contact starts to give you those spikes. So now, instead of your dopamine coming from all the different places in your life that it could come from, things like hanging out with friends, hobbies, work, exercise, your spiritual life, time spent with your family, now all of your dopamine is just coming from this one place over and over again. One person, one source, and your brain learns very quickly. This is the thing we're doing now. This is the thing that makes life brighter and worth living and exciting and pleasurable. Here's the second piece. Once your brain gets used to getting its little hits from this one person, then that person is suddenly removed from your life. Whether by your choice or theirs, they ghost you, you break it off with them, you block them, they break up with you, you decide to do no contact, whatever happens. Your brain does not immediately go, oh, okay, cool, we're back down to zero. That's not what happens. What happens is your brain goes looking for the thing it got used to. It says, where's my thing? Where's the person? Where's the text? Where's the story I used to build in my head that made me feel so good? And when it can't find it, that's when you crash. And this is the part I really want you to get. That crash will feel lower than your old normal because you're not at a baseline of zero anymore. You're dipping below now, which is why people say, I feel dead inside after a breakup. Why does nothing feel good anymore? Why does food not taste good? Why does music not make me feel anything? Why does hanging out with friends not bring me pleasure like it used to? Well, it's because for a little while your system is trying to recalibrate. I mean, it's just lost its main source of dopamine. That's kind of a big deal. So no, love withdrawal is not you being dramatic. It's not about being too weak to handle this properly. A lot of us think that when we struggle so much in a really hard breakup, especially after limerence, we're failing at healing somehow. That's not it. And I want to park on that word for a second, withdrawal, because we're really used to hearing that word with substances, with alcohol withdrawal, drug withdrawal, and we think it only belongs there. But if you think about what withdrawal actually means, it means your body is reacting to the absence of something it got used to. In that case, it makes total sense that it would happen with people too, especially in limerence, which is a person addiction. With a person who is giving you dopamine and regulation and fantasy all at once. So, if you've cut someone off, or they've cut you off, and you're on day 3 or day 7 or day 21, and now you feel worse than you did in the relationship, this is why. Your brain is not confused. You're not maladaptive in some way. Your brain is trying to adjust. And we'll talk in a second about why this is so much worse than limerence, but I wanted to give you this framework first so that you stop telling yourself, well, if it hurts this much, it must mean that this person was the one, that I've lost my soulmate. No, it hurts this much because your reward system got used to them. You're just human, that's all. You don't have to punish yourself for it. Okay, so what about normal romantic love? Now that we've talked about dopamine and why your system even has the capacity to crash in this way, let's zoom out a little bit and talk about romantic love in general. Because this is important. We talk a lot on this channel about chemistry and intensity and how those things can hook you. But that doesn't mean that intensity itself is bad. Humans are literally built to get high on each other. If you've ever read Helen Fisher or even just heard her in interviews, she basically explains that falling in love is a universal human experience, and people in that early romantic infatuation phase report almost across the board the same list of experiences: exhilaration, euphoria, boundless energy, that feeling of not being able to sleep even though you're completely exhausted, loss of appetite, heart pounding, faster breathing, and for some people, a mix of anxiety and even panicky symptoms. And just to add to that, even what we call limerence sits on top of this same system. Fisher actually puts limerence right alongside romantic love and infatuation, not as some sort of alien thing that is pathological in and of itself. That is why I'm not a fan of the common idea that limerence is not love. It's a possible beginning of love. It just happens to go wrong a lot of the time. And some of the problem can be assigned to the fact that some of us, because of our existing wiring or our history, such as insecure attachment styles, more addictive personalities, a bit of OCD already running in the background, guilty, we are more likely to stay in that revved up phase and not let it cool off the way it does for other people. And many of us with complex trauma tend to get involved in connections that are not healthy in the first place, with people who are not really available or capable. So you can see that the list of complications that lead to deep limerence is long. All of these have nothing to do with you being weird or too much. That's the brain doing what it does when it decides this person matters. It ramps up dopamine, it ramps up motivation. And it narrows your focus so that you want this particular person of all others. That narrowing of focus is the reason you generally can only really be romantically infatuated with one person at a time. The system is designed to spotlight one person at a time. So in that sense, falling in love is already a socially acceptable addiction. Everybody approves of it because it bonds us. But neurologically, it's still a revved up state. You are not at baseline when you're falling deeply in love. Now, a lot of the research on romantic love, including Fisher's work and later reviews that compare love to addiction, they point out something really simple. The early stages of romantic love behave a lot like addiction. You're preoccupied. You keep thinking about the person. You get a little hit when they respond, and you crash a little bit when they don't. It's the same reward and withdrawal pattern. But they also note that in a healthy relationship, that intensity usually settles as the bond becomes safer and more consistent. So in a healthy relationship, these addictive characteristics gradually disappear as the relationship goes on. You get more safety, more consistency, more day-to-day bonding, and the nervous system goes, okay, I don't have to run this at full volume anymore. So love and addiction start in the same neighborhood, but love moves to a calmer suburban neighborhood. Limerence that doesn't resolve into a relationship doesn't really. Here's where limerence is different. In limerence, the thing that's supposed to make the addictive part fade never really happens unless it does turn into a relationship. You can see how that can be a problem. And because you either don't get full access to the other person, or you don't get a clear yes, or you don't get day-to-day predictability, you end up stuck in that uncertain state, or in fantasy, or in maybe someday we could do this. And uncertainty plus intermittent reward is the perfect recipe for keeping the system tuned to the max. So instead of the intensity dripping down over time like it does in a normal relationship, it actually stays high. Sometimes it even gets sharper, which is why people will say things like, but we weren't even officially together. I don't understand why I would feel this way. Why am I this wrecked over this person? Well, because you got stuck in the early phase the entire time, and then it ended, or it got taken away. So to pull this together for today, withdrawal from a normal relationship can already feel awful, but withdrawal from limerence often feels harsher because your body never got a chance to cool down. So the crash feels sharper and more dramatic because when you remove something that's still giving you intense spikes of dopamine, the crash tends to feel bigger than the story you have available to justify why you feel this way. And yes, in a normal romantic relationship that does cool down, you still get dopamine. You still get pleasure from your person, but it's not the same as the sharp spikes you get in early infatuation or in limerence. What happens in limerence is that you can stay in that high crystallized obsessive phase for a long time. And then when disillusion finally hits, when it becomes clear that either the LO is not choosing you, or for some reason or other it isn't going to turn into a real mutual relationship, there isn't a soft landing into secure bonding. There's just a drop. So of course it feels terrible. Next time we can talk about what withdrawal actually looks like, the flatness, the obsessive checking, the I feel like I'm crawling out of my skin phase that so many people don't know how to get through, and the relapse that usually happens right there. But I wanted you to have this first so that you can stop telling yourself there's nothing else after this because I've lost my soulmate, or I'll never find another person I feel so compatible with, and that's why I'm so crushed. It's just that your reward system got attached and it didn't get to land anywhere gently or gradually. It just went down all at once. As always, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use it. It really helps this channel grow. Until next time.